The death of Elvis. The neon sign outside the Blue Note buzzed like a dying fly in the sticky Memphis night. I was nursing a whiskey that burned like the regrets of my past when the dame walked in, a vision draped in mystery, with eyes that held secrets deeper than the Mississippi. She didn't say much, just slid into the booth with a tremble in her voice that spelled trouble. "Mr. Black," she whispered, "I need your help. It's about Elvis." I'd heard the whispers. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, dead under suspicious circumstances. The newspapers blamed an overdose, a heart attack, a tragic accident, but something in her eyes told me it was all a goddamn cover-up. I had seen too many kings fall in this town to believe in coincidences. I lit a cigarette and took a drag, the smoke mingling with the tension in the air. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice gravelly and low. She hesitated, then spilled out a tale of late-night phone calls, secret meetings in smoky back alleys, and a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of the music industry. According to her, Elvis had discovered a plot, a money trail that ran from his own inner circle to the underbelly of organized crime. Someone didn't want him singing the truth. The next morning, I found myself in the mansion that once rang with laughter and the sound of a guitar's twang. The place was silent now, the opulence dulled by sorrow and shadows. I knelt beside Elvis's ornate bed, where the king had taken his last breath. The body lay still, but the air was charged with secrets. There was something off, a half-burned note hidden under a loose floorboard, written in a shaky hand. It read, "The crown is cursed. Trust no one." I pocketed the note and started my investigation. My first stop was the local police station, a shabby joint run by cops who were either too crooked or too scared to dig deeper. The lead detective, a man with a grin that reeked of guilt and bourbon, brushed off my questions with a shrug. "Old rock star, natural causes," he said. But I knew better. I had seen the underbelly of this city long enough to know that the truth was always buried under layers of lies. My next move was to track down Eddie the Axe Malone, a former bodyguard turned enforcer, known to have his fingers in every pie that mattered. Eddie was a hulking brute with a scar that ran down his left cheek like a map of his misdeeds. When I cornered him in a grimy alley behind a rundown bar, his eyes darted like nervous minnows. "Eddie, I'm not here for a friendly chat. What do you know about Elvis's last days?" I demanded, my tone as sharp as the knife I kept tucked in my coat. He squirmed like a worm. "I ain't saying nothing without my lawyer," he growled. But his eyes betrayed him, flickers of fear and desperation. After some rough words and an even rougher punch, Eddie spilled the beans. Elvis had been mixed up in something dangerous: blackmail, drugs, and dirty money. His manager, a slick operator known as Tony Silk Marconi, was the mastermind. Tony had used Elvis's charm and magnetism to launder cash and silence dissent, and when Elvis threatened to go public, Tony had him silenced. Eddie claimed he'd seen Tony's men in a black sedan lurking outside Elvis's mansion the night of the king's final performance. Armed with Eddie's shaky testimony, I made my way to Tony's office, a place that reeked of expensive cologne and expired loyalties. Tony was a man who wore his suit as if it were a second skin, slick hair combed back, like he was in a perpetual state of readiness for trouble. When I confronted him, he smiled with the ease of a man who knew he was untouchable. "Mr. Black, isn't it? I must say your timing is as impeccable as your reputation," he drawled, leaning back in his leather chair. "But I assure you, Elvis's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. You're chasing ghosts." I wasn't fooled. I tossed the half-burned note on his desk. "A tragic accident? Then explain this. The crown is cursed. Trust no one. Who'd write this, Tony? And why bury a secret message in the king's bed?" Tony's smile flickered for a moment, a crack in the facade. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, detective. Elvis got himself into a mess that was bigger than his blue suede shoes. But some things are best left unsaid." It was clear Tony wasn't just protecting himself, he was shielding someone else, The deeper I dug, the more tangled the web became. Late one night, while the rain hammered the city like a vengeful god, I met with an old friend, Sally, a lounge singer with a voice that could melt steel. She had once shared a stage with Elvis, and the king trusted her implicitly. "Black, listen," Sally said, her eyes rimmed with red from too many sleepless nights. Elvis was scared. He told me he had proof of Tony's dirty money, evidence that would blow the whole operation wide open. He was planning to come clean, even if it meant his own end. It all clicked into place. Elvis hadn't died by chance. He had been murdered, silenced before he could reveal the truth. Tony's empire was built on a foundation of lies and blood, and Elvis was the first domino to fall. I needed hard evidence, something to nail Tony to the wall. I retraced my steps to the mansion one last time, scouring every shadow and corner. That's when I noticed it, a hidden safe behind a painting of Elvis in his prime. With trembling hands and a battered safecrackers kit, I managed to pry it open. Inside were stacks of documents, bank records, and ledgers that painted a damning picture of corruption. Names, dates, transactions. It was a smoking gun. Before I could leave, footsteps echoed in the corridor. I ducked behind a door as two men in dark suits entered, their eyes scanning for any sign of intrusion. They were cleaning up the mess, ensuring no loose ends remained. I waited until they left, then gathered the evidence and slipped out into the rain-soaked night. Back at my cramped office, I pored over the documents. Every page confirmed what I already suspected. Tony Silk Marconi had orchestrated Elvis's downfall. And there was more. High-ranking officials in the city's underworld were involved. The king had been a casualty in a war waged with money and power. The following day, with the evidence safely tucked away, I handed it over to a trustworthy reporter who had a knack for shaking the foundations of the corrupt. Within days, headlines screamed the shocking truth. Elvis Presley was not just a fallen icon, but a martyr of a sinister plot. The revelation rocked Memphis to its core. I never did get a thank you from the king's ghost, but I'd seen enough in my years to know that justice was a fickle friend. I poured myself a whiskey and stared out at the city, a city that had lost its king, but not its secrets. In a world where the truth was buried beneath layers of lies, sometimes a man like me had to claw his way through the muck to bring a little light to the darkness. As the sun rose over Memphis, I realized that the case was far from closed. The fallout from Elvis's death would ripple through the city's underbelly for years to come, and I'd be there watching, waiting, and ready to fight for every truth that dared to surface. In this crooked town, the king might be dead, but the battle for justice was just beginning. And so, I lit another cigarette, the ember a tiny beacon in the twilight of my battered soul, and prepared for the next chapter in a story that was far from over.